Jamaican, but you know, ting is a Jamaican ting. I have identified which light conditions and which medium type or nutrition yields the highest number of spores based on the 3 fungal isolates, and go through the analysis of identifying which light conditions and which medium resulted in the highest spores by either of the 3 pathogens. And so I first harvested the spores in water, and I'll put that video in the iCard so that I don't have to go through the step. You can watch that video to see how I harvested it. And once I've harvested all 27 samples, I then use a Hemocytometer, which is a manual tool for counting cells. And if you recognize heme in the prefix for blood, so it was originally designed or invented for quantifying blood cells. So I'm going to go through my modified method or rules for using the Hemocytometer. So the Hemocytometer contains 2 chambers, and I'm going to put an image here as I talk so you can see. So I call it chamber 1, chamber 2, so the top and bottom, and each chamber has 25 large squares, and those squares, you can see that they're counted. I've labeled them 1 to 25, right? And within each of those 25 large squares, there are smaller squares, right? So the large square, numbered in black, contains smaller squares, and each of those smaller squares within that large square, so lot of squares, there are 16. So there are 2 chambers, top and bottom. Each chamber contains 25 large squares, and those 25 large squares are further divided into 16 smaller squares. And so those are the stars, yellow with the black borders. And then what I do, or in the lab, what we've come up with our own method and rules for counting the cells. So you're not going to count all the cells in all the 25 squares. So you want to choose 5 of the large ones and then select a number of the 16 small squares. So what I do in our lab is for chamber 1, we've decided to count on a diagonal. And so that will be the orange boxes that are highlighted. So we go in chamber 1, count on a diagonal, and what we then do is within those 5 large 25 squares on the diagonal, we choose the small ones at the very corner. So what is at the bottom right? And then we count 1 spore in each of those small cells. So at the end, I should have 5. And then the cells that I count those spores in are bolded, and it has a brighter orange and has the numeral 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in. Then I record that number. I have a template that I'll just put that number in. So however, how many spores are within those highlighted boxes, I'll insert that into the template. It will spit out a number. I move on to the chamber 2, which looks the same, but you'll see that in chamber 2, I have the vertical, there are far left squares highlighted in a lighter blue. And then again, it's the top boxes to the left that are bolded and has the numerical 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so I repeat the same process. So in chamber 2, it's counted on a vertical. And then however, how many spores are in those highlighted cells, I then take that, input it into my template, and then it does a calculation because each of the cells, it has a known volume and depth. I think 1 times 10 to the 3, so 10,000, and 1 times 10 to the 4, sorry, 10,000. And from that, it does a calculation and spits out the number in spores per ml. And so that final number, that it averages the 2 chambers, does the calculation, spits out that spore per ml, and that represents the concentration of the spores in my inoculum. And so that value that I get, I will compare it across all 27 samples, all 3 light conditions and all media type, and then based on that I will select which has the highest spores. And so what I found out once I did the analysis of the values, I found that the condition, so if you've guessed when you watch the earlier video when I asked for help, I'll put the video here, you can go back, but if you've guessed correctly, I found out that the light dark cycle, so that is a condition across all 3 isolates, across all 3 media, regardless of what it was, we had the most spores under the light dark conditions. And so I'll put the agar plates here so you can see. So for isolate 1, it was a different medium or different nutrition that had the highest spores under that light dark condition. In fact, it was the meat for isolate 1 that had the highest spore. But for isolate 2 and 3, they grew best on the vegetable juice agar. Had the highest, but again on the light dark conditions. So you'll see the medium, and then I'll show you what the spore count is like in it. So I hope you're able to see it. The spores are translucent. I didn't add any dye for contrast. So they're just really small circles, and I just count them. You'll see that they're all over the Hemocytometer surface, and I just go through and count them based on the rules I spoke about earlier in those 2 boxes. And yeah, that's how I did my counts. That's how I did my analysis, and that's what I present in my report. And I will choose those medium or those group that had the highest number of spores to do further testing to answer other questions. But I hope you, I don't know, enjoyed watching this, and that you got a little more insight in part of the other process of what I do in my plant pathology lab, and as it relates to fungus and enumerating or counting spores and assessing how well they grow, the impact of environmental conditions such as light, temperature, nutrition on their growth and their ability to produce spores. Spores are infection particles that eventually needs to switch or germinate into another form known as hyphae. That hyphae now is then used to infect, invade, penetrate plant cells. And if it's it's plant related, I was going to say if it was a animal host, it would be the same, but I'm going to stick with the plant because that's what I'm working with. So yes, and that's it for today. Thank you. Have a good day. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more content. And I also have an Instagram page of the same name at Science Things with TINGSS, because someone else had Ting. I don't know if they're Jamaican, but you know, Ting is a Jamaican thing. I'll put the QR code here so you can just scan it, or you can manually search for it. But bye.